This isn't some fictional drama I cooked up for entertainment. It's a piece of my own life that I had to claw my way back from. It's a reminder that the deepest cuts often come from the hands you thought would always be there to hold you up. It all started with the soft, sterile glow of a laptop screen in our third-floor apartment in Lincoln Park, the one we'd shared for 5 years. The mahogany desk, a family heirloom from our grandfather, felt cold beneath my forearms as I stared at the numbers that made no sense, 87,014. That was all that was left of the $250,000 our parents had left us, the seed for a future we had spent a decade planning together. And in the transaction history, a single, brutal line, wire transfer, Sterling Bank of Grand Cayman. If you genuinely enjoy our stories, please subscribe to the channel, tell us where you're from, and what time it is right now. It's always fascinating to know how far our story flows. My cousin Leo and I weren't just family. We were a unit, a 2-person lifeboat after our respective parents, who were siblings, passed away in a car accident when I was 19 and he was 20. We'd navigated grief, college, and the daunting landscape of adult life as a team. The inheritance was our shared legacy, a sacred trust we'd agreed not to touch until we were ready to launch our dream project, a cozy, independent bookstore cafe in the heart of Chicago. We called it The Second Chapter. It was more than a business plan. It was a promise to our parents, a way to build something beautiful from the ashes of our loss. For 5 years, that money sat in a joint savings account, a symbol of our shared future, growing slowly, patiently. We lived frugally, worked steady but unfulfilling jobs, me in graphic design, Leo in junior-level finance, always with our eyes on the prize. Leo was the charismatic one, the dreamer who could charm anyone into believing in our vision. I was the practical one, the planner, the one who managed the numbers and timelines. We were supposed to be the perfect partners. The balance on that screen was more than a missing number. It was a detonation at the core of my world. My first thought, a desperate, grasping hope, was that it was a mistake, a bank error, a hack. It couldn't be Leo. Not my Leo, the one who held my hand at our parents' funeral and whispered, "It's you and me against the world, Maya." I called the bank's 24-hour fraud hotline, my voice trembling so badly I could barely get my account number out. The agent on the other end was professionally calm, which only amplified my panic. He confirmed the transfer. It was initiated 3 days prior from a computer logged into our home network. It was authorized using security questions only Leo and I would know, our childhood street name, our shared dog's name, the city where our parents first met. "Ma'am," the agent said, his voice softening with a practiced empathy that felt like sandpaper on my raw nerves. "With a joint account, either party can authorize a full withdrawal. From our end, the transaction is perfectly valid." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Valid. I hung up the phone, a dial tone screaming into the silence of the apartment. I called Leo. It went straight to voicemail, his cheerful recorded voice a cruel parody. "Hey, you've reached Leo. Leave a message and I'll make your day better." I texted him, my thumbs shaking. "Leo, call me now. Emergency, bank account," then again. "Where are you? The money is gone." Nothing. The silence from his end was an answer more damning than any confession. My world narrowed to the 4 walls of our apartment, a space suddenly filled with ghosts of his betrayal. Every object was a monument to a shared life that was now a lie. The worn armchair where he'd read fantasy novels for hours, the mismatched coffee mugs we'd collected from thrift stores, the corkboard in the kitchen, still pinned with sketches for our cafe logo that I'd designed, and a brochure for a commercial space on Clark Street we'd dreamed of leasing. The truth settled in, not like a wave, but like a slow, seeping poison. He hadn't just taken the money. He had meticulously dismantled our shared past and stolen our collective future, leaving me in the wreckage. That night, sleep was a foreign country I couldn't visit. I just sat at that mahogany desk, the laptop screen now dark, and watched the dawn break over the Chicago skyline, the rising sun casting long, cold shadows across the floor. The city was waking up, but my life had ground to a halt. The betrayal was so absolute, so profound, it felt physical, like a phantom limb that ached with a loss I was only beginning to comprehend. He didn't just drain our account, he drained the meaning from the last 10 years of my life. And as the first rays of sunlight hit the framed photo of the four of us on the mantelpiece, me, Leo, and our parents, smiling on a beach vacation years ago, a different feeling began to curdle in the pit of my stomach, beneath the grief and the shock. It was a cold, quiet whisper that was getting louder with every unanswered call. It was rage. He thought he could just disappear. He thought I would just break. He had no idea who he had just created. The next 48 hours were a blur of caffeine and frantic, fruitless searching. I left a dozen more messages, each one escalating from confusion to pleading to white-hot anger. I drove to his office, a soulless glass tower in the Loop, only to be told by a frosty receptionist that Mr. Rossi had tendered his resignation 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks. The planning, the sheer calculated deceit of it all, sent a fresh wave of nausea through me. He had been lying to my face every single day for at least half a month, coming home to our apartment, sharing meals, talking about the second chapter, while actively plotting its destruction. I contacted the Chicago Police Department, but the officer who took my report was dismissive. "It's a joint account, miss," he said, barely looking up from his computer. "It's a civil matter, not a criminal one. You need to hire a lawyer." A lawyer. With what money? The $87 in my account wouldn't even cover a consultation fee. Our rent was due in a week. I was adrift, and the full weight of my predicament was starting to crash down on me. Leo had handled our finances, a role he'd enthusiastically taken on given his job. It was another layer of his con, another way he'd woven himself into the fabric of my trust so he could unravel it all at once. The humiliation was as painful as the loss. He had used my own faith in him as a weapon against me. Desperate for any clue, any breadcrumb that might lead me to him, I started digging through his room. It was disturbingly neat, almost sterile. His closet was half empty. He'd taken his expensive clothes, his designer shoes, but left behind the worn college sweatshirts and faded band t-shirts, the relics of the person I thought he was. It felt like a deliberate shedding of his old skin. Under his bed, in a box of old college textbooks, I found it. It wasn't a smoking gun, just a small, innocuous-looking flash drive. My heart hammered against my ribs as I plugged it into my laptop. It was mostly filled with old essays and photos, but in a folder titled MISC, I found a subfolder labeled Project Nightingale. It was password protected. I spent hours guessing, trying every combination of names, dates, and memories I could think of. Nothing worked. It was a digital dead end, a locked box I couldn't open. Defeated, I sank onto his empty bed, the scent of his cologne still faintly lingering on the pillow, a ghostly reminder of his presence. That's when my eyes landed on the spine of a worn paperback on his nightstand, The Count of Monte Cristo. It was a book we'd both loved as kids, a story of epic betrayal and meticulous revenge. Leo had always been fascinated by the intricate, long-game nature of the protagonist's plan. A cold dread washed over me. This wasn't an impulsive act of greed. This was a performance. This was his grand design. I picked up the book. Tucked inside the back cover was a folded piece of paper. It was a printout from a web forum, a discussion about the best countries for asset protection and offshore banking. Leo's username, Dante Legacy, was circled. My blood ran cold. He saw himself as an epic hero, escaping his mundane life. He saw me as part of the prison he needed to escape from. The betrayal wasn't just a byproduct of his theft, it was a central part of his fantasy. The real breakthrough came from a place I least expected it. We had a shared family cloud server, a digital attic where we stored old photos, documents, and backups. I hadn't looked at it in years. I logged in, digging through folders of grainy childhood pictures, and found a directory labeled Scans. Inside were low-resolution scans of passports, birth certificates, and incorporation documents for something called Nightingale Holdings Limited, registered in the Cayman Islands. The date on the documents was 6 months ago. My breath caught in my throat. He had been setting up his escape for half a year. And then I saw the final piece, the one that made the whole world tilt on its axis. Attached to the incorporation files was a prospectus, a business plan for a luxury travel and lifestyle company. It was slick, professional, and filled with glossy photos of yachts and private jets. The mission statement was about liberating clients from the mundane and helping them live their authentic, unburdened lives. The author of this nauseating document, the founder and CEO of Nightingale Holdings, was listed as Leo Rossi, but it was the About the Founder section that finally broke me. It was a carefully constructed fiction, painting him as a self-made financial prodigy who had bravely left behind familial obligations to forge his own path. There was a professional headshot of him I'd never seen, smiling, confident, his eyes alight with a future he'd purchased with my half of our past. And then, at the bottom, a list of his executive team. There was only one other name, CFO Amelia Hayes. I knew that name. Amelia had been Leo's on-again, off-again girlfriend in college, a ruthlessly ambitious woman I had never trusted. I looked her up on social media. Her profile was a curated highlight reel of a new life. Pictures of her and Leo in Bali, in Monaco, on a yacht in the Caribbean. The photos were dated over the last few months. He hadn't just been planning this. He'd been living it, in secret, on short trips he'd passed off as business conferences for his boring finance job. Every late night at the office was a lie. Every weekend work retreat was a deception. He had been funding this secret life, this affair, with small withdrawals from our joint account, testing the waters, and I had been too trusting to ever check the statements. He had built an entire parallel existence funded by our shared dream, with another woman at his side. The scope of his treachery was breathtaking. It wasn't just about the money. He had erased me, rewritten our history to cast me as an obstacle, a burden he had to escape. The grief I felt was profound, but the rage was purifying. It burned away the tears, the shock, the helplessness. Staring at that picture of him, smiling on a sun-drenched deck, a glass of champagne in his hand, I felt something shift inside me. The victim was gone. I wasn't going to mourn. I was going to hunt. He thought he was the Count of Monte Cristo. He had no idea what Edmond Dantès was truly capable of. He'd left digital breadcrumbs, arrogant and careless, and I was going to follow them all the way to his new kingdom and burn it to the ground. The eviction notice on our apartment door was the final push I needed. It was a stark, official confirmation of my new reality. I was broke, on the verge of being homeless, and utterly alone. For a full day, I allowed myself to wallow. I sat on the floor of my empty living room, surrounded by packing boxes, and let the sheer weight of it all consume me. I was a ghost in my own life, haunted by the future that had been stolen. But as the sun set on the second day, casting long shadows that looked like bars across the floor, the despair began to harden into something else. It was resolve, cold, clear, and absolute. Leo had built his new life on a foundation of lies, using my money as his bricks and my trust as his mortar. I was a graphic designer, a planner, someone who understood structure, and I knew that any structure built on a faulty foundation could be brought down. I just needed to find the load-bearing walls and start chipping away. My first move was to find a lawyer, but the kind of high-powered firm that could fight an international asset case was laughably out of reach, so I looked for a different kind of weapon. I spent 2 days in the law library at the University of Chicago, fueled by vending machine coffee, researching attorneys who specialized in financial fraud and asset recovery, specifically those who worked on contingency. I was looking for a shark, someone young and hungry, who saw a high-stakes case, not a charity project. That's how I found Sarah Jenkins. Her online profile was lean but aggressive. A former prosecutor for the state of Illinois, she had recently started her own small firm. Her specialty? Complex financial betrayals. When I met her in her small, cluttered office overlooking the Chicago River, she listened to my entire story without interruption, her eyes sharp and analytical. I laid out everything I had found, the incorporation documents, the business plan, the social media photos. When I was done, she leaned back in her chair, a slow, predatory smile spreading across her face. "He's arrogant," she said, her voice a low hum. "That's good. Arrogant people get sloppy. They want to show off. That social media trail is a gift." She agreed to take the case on a 40% contingency. "I won't lie to you, Maya," she warned. "It's a long shot. Cayman Islands banks don't just roll over. We need leverage. We need to find a vulnerability he doesn't know he has." Our first step was to hire a forensic accountant, a man named Ben Carter, who Sarah described as a bloodhound with a calculator. I sold my car, a reliable old Honda that held memories of road trips with Leo, to pay Ben's retainer. The sting of that sale was a constant, burning reminder of what was at stake. While Ben started untangling the web of wire transfers, I had my own mission. I needed to get inside that encrypted flash drive. I remembered Leo mentioning a security conference he attended a year ago, bragging about a speaker who was a white hat hacker. I found the conference agenda online, found the speaker's name, and sent him a cold email. I told him a sanitized version of the story, a business partner who'd absconded with company funds, and attached a screenshot of the encrypted folder. I offered him a small percentage of whatever we recovered. To my shock, he replied. He was intrigued by the challenge. 3 days later, an email from him landed in my inbox. Subject: "The Nightingale is singing." He had cracked it. The password, in a fit of supreme narcissistic irony, was "Second Chapter." He had locked away the plans to destroy our dream using the name of the dream itself. The contents of the drive were a treasure trove. There were detailed timelines, contact lists for wealth managers in Grand Cayman, and, most importantly, copies of his correspondence with Sterling Bank. He had used a private encrypted email service, but he'd saved the logs. He had lied to them, creating a false paper trail to suggest the funds were from a recent property sale, not a shared inheritance. He had committed bank fraud. This was the leverage Sarah needed. This elevated it from a civil dispute to a federal crime. Sarah moved quickly, filing a petition in the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Illinois. She argued that while the money was in a foreign account, the fraud had been perpetrated on U.S. soil from a laptop in Chicago against a U.S. citizen. She attached the evidence from the flash drive in Ben's preliminary report, which showed the money flowing from our joint account to a holding account in Delaware, then in a series of smaller transfers to Nightingale Holdings in the Caymans, a classic money laundering technique called structuring. While the legal gears began to grind slowly, I focused on Leo's new life. His and Amelia's social media accounts were a fire hose of smug opulence. They were living in a penthouse in Miami's South Beach. They were attending charity galas, posing with minor celebrities. Leo was positioning himself as a tech mogul, a visionary. His company, Nightingale Holdings, was supposedly launching a new, exclusive travel app. He was building a brand, a reputation, a house of cards. I became an obsessive digital ghost, watching their every move. I created fake profiles to follow their friends and business associates. I learned their habits, their favorite restaurants, the gym Amelia went to. I wasn't just looking for information. I was studying my enemy, learning the architecture of his new life so I could design its demolition. One night, I found what I was looking for. Leo announced on his Instagram that Nightingale Holdings had secured its first round of seed funding and would be hosting an exclusive launch party for its new app, Odyssey, at a chic art gallery in Miami's Wynwood Arts District. It was a big moment for him, the public unveiling of his new identity. The guest list would be packed with investors, tech journalists, and the wealthy clientele he was targeting. It was the perfect stage. I forwarded the invitation to Sarah. Her reply was instant. "This is it. This is the moment. The court just granted our motion for a temporary restraining order to freeze his assets, pending a hearing. The order is sealed. He won't know it's coming." My heart was pounding. This was our chance to pull the rug out from under him, not just financially, but publicly. "I'm going to Miami," I wrote back. "No, Maya," she replied. "Let the marshals handle it. It's too dangerous." But I had to be there. I needed to see it. I needed to look him in the eye when the world he had built with my money crumbled around him. This wasn't just about justice anymore. It was personal. I bought a one-way ticket to Miami with the last of my savings. I had no plan for what I would do after, where I would stay, or how I would get back. All that mattered was being there when the curtain fell on Leo's fraudulent little play. The flight to Miami was surreal. I was an imposter, a woman running on fumes and fury, flying towards a showdown that would define the rest of my life. I had $87 and a court order in my purse. It felt like a pitifully small arsenal against the empire Leo had built. I landed in the sticky, humid heat of South Florida and took a bus to a cheap motel miles from the glamour of South Beach. The room smelled of mildew and regret, a fitting backdrop for my mission. I spent the day preparing. I bought a simple, elegant black dress from a second-hand shop, a costume to blend in with the elite crowd. I studied the event details, memorizing the gallery layout and the schedule. The party was scheduled to begin at 8 p.m. Sarah had arranged for the U.S. Marshals to serve the TRO at exactly 9:15 p.m., the time Leo was scheduled to give his keynote address and live demo of the Odyssey app. It was designed for maximum impact, to detonate in the middle of his moment of triumph. Getting into the party was my biggest hurdle. It was an exclusive, invite-only event. But Leo's arrogance had once again provided an opening. In one of his many gloating posts, he had tagged the PR firm organizing the launch. I spent hours on their website, finally finding the name of a junior event coordinator. I called the gallery's front desk, posing as a frantic assistant from the PR firm, claiming the coordinator had left her tablet at the venue during setup and needed someone to grant her access. I gave them her name. Then I showed up at the guest check-in, dressed to the nines, and introduced myself as the coordinator they were expecting. The harried staff, overwhelmed by the arriving crowd, waved me through without a second glance. I was in. The gallery was stunning, a cavernous white space filled with modern art, beautiful people, and the low thrum of electronic music. Waiters in crisp white jackets moved through the crowd with trays of champagne and ludicrously small appetizers. I grabbed a glass of champagne, the bubbles fizzing against my lips, and tried to look like I belonged. Every nerve in my body was on fire. I spotted him across the room, holding court in the center of a circle of admirers. He looked like a king in his domain. He was wearing a tailored suit that probably cost more than my car. Amelia was on his arm, draped in diamonds, laughing at something he said. The sight of them, so happy, so successful, so utterly insulated from the destruction they had caused, was like a physical blow. The old, wounded part of me wanted to scream, to run over there and tear them apart. But I held my ground, channeling the cold, calculating woman I had become. I retreated to the shadows at the edge of the room, my back against a cool concrete wall, and I watched. I watched him work the room, shaking hands, flashing that $1,000,000 smile that I now knew was as fake as the company he had built. He was a performer, and this was his grandest stage. At 9:10 p.m., the music faded, and a hush fell over the crowd. Leo stepped onto a small, elevated stage, a massive screen behind him displaying the sleek logo for Odyssey. A spotlight hit him, and he basked in it, his face radiating smug satisfaction. He looked out at the audience, his eyes sweeping across the room. For a heart-stopping second, his gaze met mine. There was a flicker of something, confusion, disbelief, but then it was gone. He probably thought his mind was playing tricks on him. I didn't exist in this world he had created. I was a ghost from a past he had buried. "Thank you all for being here," he began, his voice smooth and confident. "Tonight is not just the launch of an app. It's the launch of a philosophy of freedom, of breaking away from the things that hold you back." I almost laughed at the irony. As he spoke, I saw them enter. 2 men in dark suits, their presence an immediate, jarring note in the symphony of glamour. They moved with a quiet, unhurried purpose, their eyes locked on the stage. They were the U.S. Marshals. They flanked the stage, waiting. Leo, lost in his own monologue, hadn't noticed them yet. He was building to his crescendo. "With Odyssey," he declared, "your assets are fluid, your movements are untethered, and your life is finally, truly, your own." He lifted his phone to the screen to begin the live demo, to show off the app's seamless interface for booking private jets and accessing exclusive concierge services. "Let me show you how simple it is to step into your new reality." The marshals chose that exact moment to ascend the stairs. One of them tapped Leo on the shoulder. The entire room fell silent. Leo turned, his smile faltering, annoyance flashing across his face. "Excuse me," he said into the microphone. "I'm in the middle of a presentation." The taller marshal leaned in and said something in his ear, his voice too low for the crowd to hear. I saw the blood drain from Leo's face. The confident CEO evaporated, replaced by the scared, cornered boy I remembered from our childhood. He stumbled back, shaking his head. The other marshal handed him a thick envelope, the court order, the freezing of every account, Nightingale Holdings, his personal accounts, Amelia's accounts, everything, the entire financial foundation of his new life, gone in an instant. A collective gasp went through the room. People started murmuring, pulling out their phones. The tech journalist smelled blood. Leo stood there frozen in the spotlight, the embodiment of a fraud exposed. To complete the scene, Amelia tried to pay for a drink at the bar, only to have her card declined. The bartender's loud declaration, "Sorry, ma'am, insufficient funds," echoed through the silent gallery. The humiliation was absolute, and it was brutally public, and I stood in the back, unseen, watching the whole thing burn. The aftermath was a symphony of chaos. Leo was escorted from the stage, his face a mask of disbelief and impotent rage. Amelia, after her public humiliation at the bar, simply vanished into the crowd, abandoning him the moment the money disappeared. Investors started making panicked calls, their voices sharp and angry. The party dissolved not into celebration, but into a scramble for the exits. The grand launch of Odyssey became its public execution. I slipped out before anyone could notice me, melting back into the humid Miami night. I walked for miles, the adrenaline coursing through me, the sounds of the city a distant buzz. I didn't feel triumphant, not yet. I just felt quiet. The rage that had fueled me for months had finally been spent, leaving behind a vast, hollow emptiness. The legal battle was long and ugly. Leo, with his assets frozen, had to rely on a public defender. The evidence was overwhelming. The fraudulent bank applications, the money laundering trail Ben had meticulously mapped, the incriminating files from the flash drive. It was an open and shut case. He was charged with wire fraud and money laundering. He tried to claim I was a disgruntled partner who had locked him out of the funds, but the paper trail of his secret life with Amelia and the incorporation of his shell company months before the transfer eviscerated his credibility. Amelia, in exchange for immunity, testified against him, painting a picture of a master manipulator who had fooled her too. It was a lie, of course, but it was a believable one. She saved herself, just as I knew she would. In the end, Leo took a plea bargain. He was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison. The court ordered the full restitution of the funds from his seized assets. After Sarah's contingency and Ben's fees were paid, I was left with just over $140,000. It was a shadow of the original inheritance, but it was mine. It was clean. It felt like the heaviest, most precious money in the world. I never returned to Chicago. The apartment, the memories, the city itself, it was all tainted. I sold what little I had left and moved west to a small coastal town in Oregon. I needed the ocean, the feeling of something vast and powerful that could wash things away. I used the money not to resurrect the old dream. The second chapter was a story written for two, and one of the authors was gone, but to build a new one, something smaller, something that was only mine. I opened a small graphic design studio, working with local businesses. It was a quiet life, a simple one. The work was honest, and at the end of the day, I could sleep soundly. I never heard from Leo again. No letters from prison, no attempts to reach out. It was as if our entire shared history had been locked away with him. Sometimes, late at night, when the fog rolls in from the Pacific, I think about him. I don't feel anger anymore, or even sadness. I just feel a profound sense of pity. He had this grand fantasy of himself as a man who could break free from his past, a modern-day Monte Cristo. But he forgot the most important part of that story. True freedom isn't about escaping your obligations. It's about facing them. He built a kingdom on stolen ground, and all it took was the truth to turn it into a tomb. The end.